How is everybody doing today? Welcome back to another episode of The Banker Next Door. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. Today, I wanted to bring you guys a really interesting story, perhaps the largest COVID tax fraud scheme in U.S. history that will, at least of what we've seen to date. This news was kind of just breaking in the last couple of days, but I wanted to bring this in. So here's an article from the Epoch Times, and this is titled, 7 Charged in America's Biggest COVID Tax Fraud Scheme. Defendants allegedly used VPNs and shell companies to abuse public programs and defraud the government. Now, this was a rather sophisticated and rather massive fraud scheme that was perpetrated on what we'll see here in a minute on the ERC tax credit. But let's get into the story here for a second. So a group of 7 who allegedly sought to steal hundreds of millions of dollars in the country's largest COVID-19 tax credit scheme by falsely claiming pandemic-era benefits were charged on January 22nd, according to the Department of Justice. An indictment unsealed in New York State charged the 7 people with operating a multi-state conspiracy in which they attempted to defraud the United States of more than $600 million by filing more than 8,000 false tax returns claiming COVID-19 related employment tax credits. The agency said in a statement, the fraud targeted programs like the Employee Retention Credit, the ERC, and the Paid Sick and Family Leave Credit, the SFLC, which were passed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The ERC gave tax credits to businesses, incentivized them to keep employees on their payroll, while the SFLC was a reimbursement made to businesses to support employees who were on sick or family leave and could not work because of COVID-19. The charges were made against Keith Williams, Jamari Lewis, Moraeus Dix, Janine Davis, Tiffany Williams, James Hames Jr., and Iwandra Mathurin, all of whom are either current or former residents of New York. Between November of 2021 and June of 2023, the defendants repeatedly exploited ERC and SFLC programs, the DOJ said. The scheme was allegedly headquartered at Credit Reset, a reported credit repair business Keith Williams owned and operated. That's interesting. The defendants acted as tax preparers and allegedly filed over 8,000 fake employment tax returns on behalf of themselves and clients, claiming COVID tax credits from the IRS. And some of the fake returns, they allegedly claimed SFLC, which exceeded reported wages, according to the department. The defendants managed to secure refund checks from the Treasury while also profiting by charging clients a fee or percentage of the tax refunds they received, the agents accused. The defendants allegedly concealed their preparation of the false tax returns by not listing themselves as the paid preparer on the tax returns and by using virtual private networks, or VPNs, to obscure their IP addresses while filing the false returns, the DOJ said. If a client did not have a business, members of the conspiracy allegedly would sometimes sell shell companies to them in order to file false tax returns. The fraudsters reportedly filed for $600 million in tax credits as part of the scheme, of which the IRS dispersed about $45 million. Authorities charged the defendants with 45 criminal counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, the assisting in preparing false tax returns. Some of the defendants also allegedly submitted false applications for loans under the pandemic-era Paycheck Protection Program. 6 people allegedly involved in the PPP fraud were charged with wire fraud as well. If convicted, the defendants face prison terms ranging from 3 to 30 years per count, depending on the charge. And then it gets into, kind of tackling pandemic fraud. The DOJ had previously charged several hundred individuals with fraud related to COVID-19. In August of 2023, the agency announced 718 enforcement actions for alleged COVID-19 fraud offenses involving $836 million. This included federal criminal charges against 371 defendants. Many of the cases involved a pandemic unemployment insurance benefit fraud, as well as fraud related to economic injury disaster loans and PPP. In March last year, the IRS announced that its criminal investigation unit had investigated 1,644 tax and money laundering cases worth approximately $8.9 billion that were linked to COVID fraud. The cases involved fraudulently obtained loans, payments, and credits aimed at supporting American workers and small businesses. In the last year alone, we have opened nearly 700 new COVID fraud investigations that collectively add up to $5 billion in potential fraud. The CI Chief Guy Fico said at the time, our special agents continue to seek out fraudsters who stole money from government loan programs for their personal gain. This month, Senator Joni Ernst announced the introduction of the Complete COVID Collections Act that seeks to extend authorization of the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery through 2030. SIGPR, that's a heck of an acronym, created as a watchdog to oversee loans provided under Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, is scheduled to expire in March of 2025. Extending the authorization allows the SIGPR to continue pursuing people who still stole COVID funds reserved for small businesses, Ernst said. Con artists took advantage of small businesses' pain during COVID to defraud government programs designed to help hardworking Americans. While we are $36 trillion in debt, we especially cannot afford to leave more than $200 billion floating around, especially in the hands of fraudsters. My Republican colleagues and I are making sure that all resources are available in this fight to get taxpayers' money back and hold these criminals accountable. So, again, I find it fascinating how much fraud there actually was during this COVID period. I mean, it is just there's some pretty staggering amounts. I mean, there at the end of the article, the senator talks about how there's basically about $200 billion worth of COVID fraud potentially hanging out there. You know, I mean, probably doesn't get anywhere near that high in terms of like convictions and actual, people held accountable for this stuff toward the end of the day. But I think this case here in particular, this group of 7 individuals that was working out of what appeared to be like a credit improvement or a credit repair type business operation. Yet they were coming in and they were telling people, oh, hey, we'll file tax returns for you. And we'll take advantage of the ERC tax credit, the SFLC tax credit, and in the situations where these individuals did not have actual businesses, they said, oh, hey, no problem. We'll just create a shell company for you. We'll go out and pay and put together an LLC real quick, probably. And just, we'll put that out and we'll just use that as your company. And then we'll create this fraudulent tax return. But then they didn't put their names on the tax returns as the tax preparers. And then when they submitted the tax returns to the IRS, they tried to use VPNs to shield where the IP address from the computers from where those tax returns were being sent. So, so very interesting scheme. Again, somewhat sophisticated scheme here. I mean, obviously you had to put a little thought into some of these things and how you were doing it. They obviously they thought evasion was obviously a big thing here. But it's just amazing. And again, I mean, some of these things you look at, and I think you think to yourself when you look at some of these cases, like, because again, part of what the article talked about was, there's been thousands of people that have charged in COVID fraud. They, like I said, this criminal investigation unit had 1,644 tax and money laundering cases right now. In the last year alone, they've opened nearly 700 new COVID fraud investigations. So there's a lot, there's been a lot of fraud, a lot of abuse in here. And so, like I said, some of them are kind of like obvious, right? Like, how in the world do these people think they were going to get away with this stuff? But some of this stuff has been a little bit more sophisticated, and some of it, you look at it and, and I think a lot of the people that perpetrated this stuff they thought that they were okay. Well, we're just going to kind of fall through the cracks here, like nobody's really going to take a hard look at this, or nobody's really going to notice. But I think they're finding out that that's not so much the case. It's not so much the case. So anyway, like I said, I just thought that this was a really interesting development. It just goes to show you that there was a tremendous amount of fraud and abuse that went along, unfortunately, with a lot of the COVID program, the PPP loans, the EIDL loans, the tax credits. And, we'll continue to keep an eye on this and see what happens in the future. So, but, if you like this episode, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. That always helps the channel. Remember, we are on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. Please be sure to leave your comments down below, as I always love getting back to everybody. And remember to check out some of the other content on the channel. But with that, I bid everyone a farewell, and I'll see you again real soon. Thanks a lot.